Caught on camera, a killer's final mistake. The sound of footsteps echoed on the wooden bridge, slow, steady, and deliberate. The wind carried the faint creak of boards beneath heavy boots. On the video, the camera shook slightly, just enough to show the figure coming closer. A man in a dark jacket, hands in his pockets, his face shadowed by a cap. And then, the words that would haunt America. Down the hill. It was a chilling command. Short, calm, and terrifying in its simplicity. The man's voice was low, controlled, too calm for what was about to happen. That was the last recording of Abby Williams and Libby German alive. Two best friends, laughing and exploring just moments before, now trapped on a quiet trail in Delphi, Indiana. They had no idea that the man behind them, the one now forever frozen on that shaky cell phone video, was leading them towards something unthinkable. When investigators first watched the clip, they knew this wasn't just any piece of evidence. It was the killer's final mistake. But before that moment on the bridge, before those haunting words, there was a small town, two best friends, and one ordinary February day that would change everything. Delphi, Indiana, wasn't the kind of place where people locked their doors. It was a quiet town where kids rode bikes, neighbors waved across fences, and the biggest event of the year was the county fair. The town sat surrounded by fields and woods, a peaceful pocket of America. In February 2017, 13-year-old Abby Williams and 14-year-old Libby German were typical middle schoolers, smart, funny, and inseparable. They had spent the weekend at Libby's house, doing what friends their age did, making videos, listening to music, talking about school crushes, and planning their next little adventure. It was winter break. The air was cold, but the sky was clear, and the girls decided to spend the afternoon exploring the historic Monon High Bridge trail, a local hiking spot that stretched through the woods and over a tall, abandoned train bridge. The bridge was famous among locals for its height and its view of Deer Creek below. To the girls, it was a small adventure, something exciting to do before the school week began again. Libby's sister, Kelsey, dropped them off near the trail around 1:30 p.m. She watched them walk away, their laughter echoing through the trees. Libby turned and waved, her phone in her hand. "We'll be fine," she said with a smile. It would be the last time Kelsey saw her sister alive. By 3 p.m., the girls were still out on the trail. Libby, always the one with her phone ready, had been snapping photos and recording small clips of their adventure. She even posted a picture of Abby walking across the bridge on Snapchat. It showed Abby wearing her blue jacket, her hands stuffed into her pockets, carefully stepping over the gaps in the weathered wood planks. The picture looked peaceful, two friends enjoying a day in nature. But just minutes later, something shifted. Libby's camera was still rolling when they noticed a man behind them on the trail. He wasn't close yet, but something about him felt off. His walk was slow, steady. His hands were deep in his coat pockets, and his head was tilted down. He wore jeans, a dark jacket, and a cap that hid most of his face. Libby, smart and cautious, kept her phone recording.
She didn't panic.
She didn't run, but she knew something wasn't right. And that short, blurry video, just a few seconds long, would later become the single most important clue in one of America's most haunting murder investigations. When the girls didn't return home that afternoon, their families began to worry. At first, it was small, the kind of worry parents always feel when their kids are late. But as the sun began to set and calls went unanswered, panic crept in. By early evening, family members were driving through Delphi, calling their names. They checked the trail, the parking lot, the nearby roads. Nothing. The cold air grew sharper, and the sky turned a deep indigo. Around 5:30 p.m., they reported the girls missing. Soon, dozens of volunteers joined the search. Flashlights cut through the darkness, voices called out into the trees, but the woods gave no answer. The search continued late into the night, but conditions grew too dangerous. The next morning, February 14th, Valentine's Day, search teams gathered again at dawn. It was cold, misty, and eerily quiet. Just after noon, a volunteer called out. He had found something near the edge of Deer Creek, not far from the Monon High Bridge. It was the girls. The discovery shattered the small town of Delphi. A place once known for its safety was now at the center of a nightmare. 2 young lives, taken brutally, and no one knew why or by whom. As police cordoned off the area, detectives began piecing together the girls' final moments. The footage from Libby's phone became the focus of everything. The video showed Abby walking across the bridge, then, behind her, the man. The final few seconds included his voice. Down the hill. Those 3 words sent chills through every person who heard them. They were calm, almost casual, but filled with command. Investigators released still frames from the video, showing the man's blurry face and clothing. They also released the audio clip. Across the country, people leaned in close to their TV screens, trying to make out details: his build, his gait, the tone of his voice. Who was he? The trail of evidence was both extraordinary and frustrating. There was clear proof of the suspect's presence, but not enough to name him. He seemed to vanish into thin air. The FBI joined the case. Tips poured in from every state. People claimed they recognized the voice. Others thought they'd seen someone matching the description in their own towns. But each lead hit a dead end. The case became national news. Every detail of that day was analyzed. Why were the girls on the trail alone? How did the man find them? Did he know them? But through all the noise, one fact stood clear. Libby's quick thinking, her decision to hit record, had captured the killer's face and voice. She had given investigators the key. They just had to figure out how to use it. For the families, the days turned into weeks, and the pain grew heavier. The Williams and German families held vigils. Photos of the smiling girls, one with her arm around the other, appeared everywhere. The image of the man from the bridge became equally recognizable, haunting news broadcasts and social media feeds. Detectives followed hundreds of leads. They tested DNA, analyzed digital evidence, and built timelines. Still, nothing broke the case. Years passed, but no one forgot. The small town of Delphi became a symbol of both heartbreak and determination. Justice for Abby and Libby, signs stayed up long after other cases would have faded from memory. Then, in 2019, investigators released a new version of the suspect's sketch, this time younger-looking, cleaner, sharper. It reignited hope. The police announced they believed the killer was local, someone from the Delphi area who blended in so well that people didn't even realize they knew him. That revelation sent shockwaves through the community. Could the person who had done this be someone they passed in the grocery store? Someone they said hello to every day? The case continued quietly behind the scenes. Detectives worked tirelessly, never giving up. Then, in October 2022, more than 5 years after the murders, there was movement. A man named Richard Allen, a pharmacy technician who lived in Delphi, was arrested and charged with the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German. When the news broke, the town froze. People gasped when they realized he had worked in the very store many residents visited regularly. He wasn't a stranger. He had lived among them the entire time. Detectives revealed that Allen had been on the Monon High Bridge that same day in 2017, the same place and time the girls were there. His clothes matched those from the video, and his voice was eerily similar to the one captured on Libby's phone. He had even admitted to police, years earlier, that he had been there that afternoon, but at the time, they hadn't connected him to the crime. Libby's recording had done exactly what it was meant to. It caught the killer. But it took years of patience, technology, and persistence to uncover the truth. As police led Allen away in handcuffs, the families stood together. It wasn't closure, not yet, but it was a step. And though Abby and Libby's voices were gone, their courage lived on through that one small clip of video, a few seconds that captured evil and, in the end, brought it to light. But the investigation didn't end with the arrest. As the trial approached, more disturbing details began to surface about how close the killer had been all along, how carefully he had hidden in plain sight, and what new evidence might still be waiting to be uncovered. And just when the town began to breathe again, something new emerged from the case files, something that suggested the story wasn't over yet. The courtroom in Delphi, Indiana, was packed. Every seat was filled. Family members, reporters, detectives, and townspeople who had lived with this mystery for 6 long years. The air was thick with tension, the kind that pressed down on every word, every breath. In the center of it all sat Richard Allen, the man accused of murdering Abby Williams and Libby German. His face was pale, his eyes tired but unreadable. As the prosecutor read the charges aloud, there was silence. Not the ordinary kind, but the kind that holds pain, disbelief, and anger all at once. Abby's mother looked straight ahead, her hands clenched tightly. Libby's grandparents sat beside her, their eyes fixed on the man who had lived freely in their community, working at the local CVS, greeting customers like an ordinary neighbor. For years, he had walked among them, hidden behind a normal life. But one mistake, the footage on Libby's phone, had finally pulled back the mask. Back in 2017, when detectives had first interviewed Richard Allen, he hadn't seemed suspicious. He told them calmly that he had been on the Monon High Bridge trail that day, taking photos of the scenery. It was a small town, lots of people visited that spot. Investigators noted his statement, thanked him, and moved on. There wasn't enough to connect him to the girls' deaths at the time. But behind the scenes, new technology was evolving: DNA databases, geolocation data, and enhanced video analytics. Detectives kept revisiting the evidence year after year. It wasn't until 2022, when a new team of investigators re-examined the case, that things began to click. They found unsealed documents, transcripts, and previously overlooked tips. One of those tips mentioned a man whose vehicle had been seen parked near the trail on the afternoon of the murders. The description of the car, a 2016 black Ford Focus, matched Richard Allen's. Then came the search warrant. When investigators searched Allen's home, tucked in a quiet Delphi neighborhood, they found a disturbing collection of evidence. In his closet, they recovered clothing consistent with what the man on the bridge had been wearing: a dark blue jacket, jeans, and a cap. There was also a weapon, a .40 caliber pistol, that would soon become one of the most important pieces of the puzzle. Ballistic analysis revealed that a spent cartridge found near the girls' bodies had been cycled through Allen's gun. The markings matched perfectly. It was the kind of evidence investigators dream of: physical proof that linked the suspect directly to the scene. When they confronted him with this discovery, his composure began to crack. Allen admitted, once again, that he'd been on the trail that day. He claimed he had seen the girls but didn't harm them. But his story didn't align with the timeline. He said he left before 3:30 p.m., yet witnesses reported seeing a man who looked just like him crossing the bridge much later. Then came the final nail in the coffin. One of his own co-workers remembered Allen talking about the murders shortly after they happened, how the case was sad, but also how he hoped they find whoever did it. The co-worker recalled the comment felt rehearsed, almost too careful. For investigators, it was enough. After years of false leads, heartbreak, and silence, they finally had their man. As the trial preparation began, the footage that Libby had recorded was enhanced and analyzed again. Experts broke down the audio, slowing it, isolating background sounds, identifying details that had gone unnoticed before. They confirmed that the man's voice saying, "down the hill," matched Allen's speech patterns. Even the faint rhythm of his footsteps on the bridge lined up with his weight and stride. The prosecution built their case carefully. They described how Allen had approached the girls on the bridge, how he had forced them toward a secluded area near Deer Creek, and how the video captured the exact moment he took control. But what made the case especially haunting wasn't just the crime itself. It was the courage of the girls. Even in those terrifying moments, Libby had the presence of mind to press record. She wasn't just capturing memories that day, she was capturing the truth. Outside the courtroom, people gathered in silent protest, holding up signs with the girls' photos. Justice for Abby and Libby. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, their cameras focused on the door. Each time Allen was brought in, handcuffed and quiet, the crowd fell into a tense silence. Inside, detectives testified about the years they spent chasing ghosts. One of them, a veteran officer who had worked the case from day one, wiped his eyes as he described finding the girls. He said he had never stopped seeing that image: the quiet creek, the trees swaying gently, and two young lives cut short. The defense tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, that the video was too blurry, that the ballistic match wasn't perfect. But the emotion in the room was too heavy, too real. The prosecution countered with a simple, undeniable truth. The girl's video had captured Alan's voice and movements. The odds of it being anyone else were almost zero. And then, during one tense moment, prosecutors played the video aloud for the courtroom. The sound echoed through the space, Libby's quiet breathing, footsteps on wood, and then that chilling voice. Down the hill. Gasps filled the room. Some people cried softly. Others couldn't look. The judge ordered a brief recess to let everyone breathe. Even seasoned officers were shaken. After the break, testimony continued. Investigators detailed how Alan's digital footprint placed him near the trail at the exact time of the murders. His phone had pinged off a nearby tower, right between 2:30 and 3:15 p.m., the critical window when the girls disappeared. The prosecution also revealed something unexpected. Alan had taken a selfie on the trail that day. The photo, recovered from his old device, showed him smiling faintly, with the same bridge visible in the background. The timestamp placed him on the trail mere minutes before the girls began recording their final video. It was the piece that tied everything together. Still, despite the overwhelming evidence, Alan said nothing. He sat in silence, his head lowered, occasionally glancing toward the floor. Some interpreted it as shame, others as calculation. As the trial neared its end, Abby and Libby's families took the stand to share their memories. They spoke of their daughter's laughter, their love of animals, their dreams for the future. They talked about the empty rooms, the birthdays missed, the silence that had replaced their voices. When Libby's grandmother spoke, her words pierced through every heart in the room. She recorded that man so that he couldn't get away with it. Even in her final moments, she was brave. The courtroom fell silent again. Even the judge's eyes glistened. By the time the closing arguments began, the weight of 6 years had settled over Delphi. The prosecution spoke last, their voice firm but emotional. Richard Allen thought he could hide in plain sight. He thought he could erase 2 young lives and walk among us like nothing happened. But he forgot one thing. Truth leaves traces. And Libby German left the most powerful one of all. As those words echoed through the room, the jury sat still, absorbing every syllable. When they finally left to deliberate, the families waited together, holding hands. Hours passed. The town outside held its breath. Then the doors opened. The jury had reached a verdict. Everyone stood. The judge returned, papers in hand. The courtroom grew so quiet that even the sound of pages turning echoed. On the charge of murder in the first degree, the pause felt eternal. We find the defendant, Richard Allen. But before the judge could finish, a sudden commotion broke out near the back of the courtroom. A man in the audience had stood up abruptly, shouting something incoherent. The bailiffs rushed toward him as chaos rippled through the crowd. Cameras swung. People gasped, and in that confusion, the final words of the verdict were lost in the noise. The families were rushed out for safety, and the session was adjourned for the day. No one knew what had just happened, or why. The trial would continue in the morning. But Delphi, once again, found itself trapped between justice and uncertainty. And as the sun set over the Indiana fields that evening, one question lingered in the air, one that no verdict could erase. Had Richard Allen acted alone, or was there someone else still out there, walking free, waiting to be caught on camera next?